This video is intended as an introduction to the comprehensive grading toolset on the Rio software. We will assume that the conform has taken place and we find ourselves ready for the grade here in multi-layer timeline effects, otherwise known as MLT effects. As with everything inside the Rio, the GUI works from left to right. We're in color and we have our first layer here known as base. Now in Rio, these grading layers are known as cascades, and people familiar with other systems may know them as nodes, layers or stacks. First up is the primary controls. As standard, we have lift, gamma and gain, otherwise known as blacks, mids and highlights. And these semicircular bars will affect the luminance only, and the center of these circles is going to affect the differentials, moving color into the blacks, mids and highs respectively. We also have access to saturation, both overall but also for the low, mid and highs. And if you want to take color out of the whites, you could easily do it here. Another useful tool built into Rio is an RGB S-curve. Very handy with this flat log material. You can wind this up, and as you can see on the curve representation here, we are pulling down the shadows and pulling up the shoulder of the highlights. You can also adjust where the pivot is on the curve here, or hold down Control while twisting the S-curve knob on the Neo panel. We start to get a bit more interesting tools when we reach curves. Let's create a new cascade, call this C for curve. We start in RGB master and we can control the curve of the black to white point very accurately. We can tap to make points, make the graph bigger and then move them by hand or by coordinates. We can also introduce tangents. And finally, we can zoom as well. This makes the curves tool very powerful for accurate control. We also have individual red, green and blue as well. We can then look at other popular graphs, including hue versus saturation, bringing down the saturation of certain colors, as well as hue versus hue to move certain shades of color towards others. There is also luminance versus saturation to take color accurately out of the shadows or of the highlights. You can do a lot of creative things in this menu, and I advise keeping the cascades named correctly with what is actually happening on those actual cascades. We can mute the cascades effect with this toggle or by tapping the knob below the list of cascades on the Neo grading panel. I'm going to skip past lights and revolver as I don't use them as accurate grading tools, but you can spend some time playing with them to see if you can get some use from them. It's when we get to the world of selective that we start to open up the advanced tools. Here we can draw shapes and isolate individual colors and their specific shades, or combine both of these features. So far we have our primary base grade with a touch of lift, gamma and gain, and a bit of S-curve. On our second cascade, we have a more accurate RGB S-curve. And now we're going to draw a shape onto this face and track it as it moves on the screen. New cascade, and let's call it face. We select shaped, draw around. Once you've drawn the shape, you can add or delete points or make them round or straight here. Under this cog, we get the option to use the mocha tracker, which works well if the head was moving and turning away from us. And the cloud tracker works very well if the face stays looking at us but moves around. Sometimes you'll have to try both out. Let's stick with mocha for now and select source so my grade doesn't make things harder for us to see. And let's start the track. The cloud tracker is faster than the mocha tracker. Let's add some softness. And put it up with some gain. And you can tweak the keyframes in the graph. More on keyframes later on. You can also soften using matinee, which allows control over the softness of each point. So I'm just adjusting the shape as well because I want to show you that you can extend the size of the shape, but the mocker tracking will maintain its original keyframe movements. Let's look at HSL keying now. Here we can choose to isolate colours very accurately based on their hue, saturation or luminance. So we can zoom in and we can select the red here, and then you'll see that I can adjust the hue, and you'll see it happening on the wheel on the right here. We have the ability to soften either side of the isolation. And then we've also got the control, of course, here for luminance and the softness for luminance, as well as blur the resulting matte and grow it. We can, of course, use a shape to constrain the area affected. If we decide we want to move the cascade earlier in the stack, we can do. And while there is no node structure in Rio, in a lot of ways this can be faster than deleting and remaking noodles between nodes. We can also cut through cascades, useful if you want to bring back sky detail, for instance, even in 16 or 32-bit float modes. You can store cascade settings in buffers on the Neo panel, useful for saved shapes like vignettes or top or side grads. Let's do a top grad here. So you just hold down, tap and type the letters on the keyboard, and then you go to shaped obviously, and then rectangle. You hold down the shift to zoom out and grade inside it. Let's blend that cascade and sky grad so it's not so severe. And then outside of the shape. And I'm obviously doing this very rough here to just give you an idea of the controls. It's not exactly a masterclass in grading. If we do have a map for a visual effects plate, then you can drag it onto the clip and it will be available here under Aux Key. We want to start copying our grades, so let's adjust the size and lock the storyboard. I just like it when you have to use the still store as a gallery or when the size is fixed. Here I choose how many I see and their size, and if I want time code. We can try and we can use the grades by holding down and throwing up onto the main screen, and on the Neo panel these controls have their own buttons. So now we come to groups. I'm going to delete the grade here. I'm going to go here to the right hand side and we're going to rename the group to 0001. And then I'm going to click and hold down add to group, which enables me to go through and start adding segments or shots to that particular group. You can also do this by tapping on the thumbnails themselves in the storyboard and you can see them going blue. Bit of S-curve, and now I've applied the settings across all those shots and you can see the thumbnails have updated. Let's now add a vignette, and I'm doing obviously the slow way. You can do this very quickly on a Neo panel with just one button press, and we're just going to turn down the gamma there. And obviously I'm making it a bit slower here, but you then go through and invert. And then you'd set it to 85 or 90. So it's a nice soft shape. And then the next thing is just to rename it, going to call it V for vignette. And now the crucial thing, I'm going to go back to the powerful group controls, and I'm going to set to top add, which is going to add this particular cascade, and you can see suddenly the thumbnails updated, and they all have the vignette, which I've highlighted with a red semicircle there for you. So this is a very basic look at the groups, but you can see how powerful it can be. And then finally, let's trim the grade on the base cascade if we had, let's say, pushed that too far. So what base trim means is that any adjustment that I've made on this particular segment, it will look at the other segments within the group and look at the cascade that I was parked on and just offset by the amount that I made that change on the first segment. So it won't automatically just override base on all the shots. Finally, we have the keyframes graph. Let's do a dynamic grade. Here, we can go into auto, and we can move these around. Just turning tangents on and off there, and I can lasso the keyframes if I'm in auto mode. I'm just turning that on and off for you there, and then I can move them up and down, and as you can see, as I make adjustments, the keyframe graph will update. We can lasso that, move it up and down, and if I wanted to, I could select above and change the acceleration of the keyframes. This should have given you a good overview of the grading tools within Rio and the creative possibilities available to you.